documentary สวัสดีน้องดิวครับโอ้โหมาคนแรกเหมือนเช่นเคยสวัสดีครับสวัสดีทุกคนนะฮะที่เข้ามานะครับสวัสดีตอนบ่าย1:40นะฮะคนแรกขอรางวัล คนแรกขอรางวัลนะฮะเดี๋ยววันนี้จะพามาดูเดี๋ยวเปิดกล้องก่อนพอดีว่าเมื่อวานนี้นะครับประมาณ11ชั่วโมงที่แล้วก็คือ React นะฮะเขาปล่อยสารคดีนะครับเป็น React documentary นะครับผม so today we are gonna watch นะครับ this documentary นะฮะเดี๋ยวจะพามาดูไปด้วยกันเลยนะครับบอกก่อนว่ามันเป็นภาษาอังกฤษนะครับก็เลยอยากจะพามาฝึกฟังด้วยนี่แหละนะครับฟังไม่ออกฟังไม่ได้ 100% ก็ไม่เป็นไรแต่เราต้องฝึกฟังเข้าใจไหมนะครับผมสวัสดีทุกคนนะครับสวัสดีพี่โจ๊กเกอร์แบนนี่นะฮะสวัสดีพุทธ SVK CH นะครับสวัสดีทุกคนด้วยครับเดี๋ยววันนี้จะพามาดูนะครับซึ่ง documentary อันนี้มันมีความยาวประมาณ1ชั่วโมง18นาทีนะครับผมก็จะคืออารมณ์เหมือนดูหนังเลยก็ตามชื่อเขาเลย ReactJS documentary นะครับผมเดี๋ยวผมมาแป๊บนึงผมเปิดให้ดูก่อน นะครับซึ่งมันเป็นช่อง Honeypot นะฮะ Honeypot เขาก็จะลงเกี่ยวกับเทคโนโลยีอะไรพวกนี้อยู่แล้วนะฮะเดี๋ยวผมขอเซิร์ชก่อน React documentary นี่เดี๋ยวผมสลับหน้าให้ดูแป๊บนึงนะนี่ฮะนี่มันเป็นช่อง Honeypot นี่นะครับแล้วเราจะมาดูกันนี่ความยาวตอนแรกผมนึกว่าประมาณ20นาทีครึ่งชั่วโมงแต่ว่า1ชั่วโมงเลยนะฮะก็มาดูกันเดี๋ยวผมขอเทสเสียงก่อนว่าได้ยินเสียงชัดปะแป๊บนึงนะเดี๋ยวผมขอเทสเสียงก่อนว่าได้ยินเสียงชัดปะโอเคได้ยินชัดนะฮะมาดูกันเลยผมตื่นเต้นมากผมอยากดูมานานแล้วตั้งแต่เขาออกเทรลเลอร์มาอยากดูมากเลย
Check 1 2. Check 1 2. 1 2 3 4. The wick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. This is React Podcast. I'm Chantastic. Today we're going back, way back to the beginning of React. 10 years in the rearview mirror, it may feel like React was always going to succeed, that a framework by Facebook was too big to fail. But this isn't that kind of story. In fact, there were many times in React's history where it seemed like it wasn't going to succeed at all. So what happened? How did React go in 10 years from looking dead on arrival to becoming the dominant front-end JavaScript framework that it is today? It starts at Facebook in 2011. jQuery and Backbone are dominating front.
เดี๋ยวสต็อปก่อน ผื่อใครยังไม่รู้นะครับ React เนี่ยถูกสร้างมาตอนปี 2011 นะที่ Facebook นะครับตอนแรกเขาทำใช้กันเองก่อนแล้วทีเนี้ยเขาก็ปล่อยออกมาให้คนใช้
in JavaScript. But more opinionated tools like Ember, Angular, and Knockout are already on the scene. In the outside world, Gangnam Style has just been uploaded to YouTube. Call Me Maybe is topping the charts, and the freshest meme is the overly attached girlfriend. In internet years, it's basically been an eternity. So, strap in, set yourself away, enable that do not disturb, because this is quite the underdog story.
I see this camera has a red light, but this one doesn't.
You just clip it on with this.
Testing, 1, 2, testing.
Facebook Pete Hunt.
When I got the offer to work at Facebook, I told my mom I was like really excited. The Social Network, the movie, had just come out, and she had seen it recently, and she was actively discouraging me from joining it because she was like, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't seem like a very nice boy.
Facebook in the time I was there I don't think there'll be anything like it ever again. It was certainly not like anything that I had experienced before. In fact, just a couple months after I joined, Kanye West came to visit Facebook's campus. And he got up on a table in the cafe and, rapped a few bars. And I was working mostly with this guy who had just graduated from college. And I was trying to explain to him, I've worked these crap jobs in software. At that point, it had been like 10 or 15 years. Nothing like this ever happens, not to software engineers.
You're my stress and you're Mama Seuss. Mama say, Mama Donda, son.
JavaScript at the time, I think, was going through this little bit of an existential crisis as to whether it was like a real programming language or a toy programming language. And so there was a lot of churn. So you had jQuery was popular and MooTools was popular, and there was so many different warring frameworks to try to get the mind share, and there's a lot of similarities between them, but each one had its kind of bespoke differences, and none of them were actually really fantastic for building really kind of complicated user interfaces and apps.
There was this trend towards more sophisticated applications that do more stuff. And at Facebook, we still had a primarily sort of server-rendered technology stack, which one of the things that we fought against for a really long time was just growing JavaScript bundle sizes. So as we moved more and more stuff to the client got slower and slower. So we actually swung the pendulum towards server-side rendering and towards, minimal amounts of JavaScript for a while.
And there was this feeling that we knew that what we were doing for client-side development wasn't working, but also that server-side wasn't going to get us all the way there. So I think that was the kind of environment that React came out of.
I joined Facebook back in 2010. I've been doing a lot of open source work, particularly in the JavaScript world. I was a committer on the Dojo.js toolkit back in the day, which is one of the granddaddies of the JavaScript movement, along with Prototype and jQuery. I spent my first 2 years at Facebook on the mobile team. We had started off a big push to compete with Apple and Google, and we thought that our best chance of success as a company was to go directly to the web and really push to build out the HTML5 ecosystem. So as part of that, we developed, myself and 2 other engineers called Vladimir Kolesnikov and Will Bailey, built a framework called Bolt.js, so named because we bolted together a bunch of things that each of us liked.
Bolt was basically more or less Facebook's implementation of a client-side MVC. I think it was like a pretty good version, maybe a better version of things like Backbone and a couple of other frameworks that had existed at the time. but it was born from a place of the specific constraints of Facebook.
It's the heart of your Facebook experience, completely rethought from the ground up. We've been working on it all year, and we're calling it Timeline.
Facebook was one of the first big products that was really an experience more than anything else. You're not trying to buy groceries or get tickets or anything like that on Facebook. You really just want to be entertained. And as such, the user interface itself needs to be really pleasing.
Bolt was not a tool belt. It was truly an application development framework, something designed and meant to build complicated, interactive, rich apps. And it was being used to build pretty complicated, very real products at Facebook at the time.
We ended up having to essentially replicate most of Facebook, all the various apps, be it timeline, chat, newsfeed. We had a whole photos app that we built. And so obviously the team had to expand greatly like that. So I think at some point we probably had maybe 25 engineers working on all this between building Bolt and building apps built on Bolt. And that's just in the mobile team.
Bolt was never the problem. It was the architecture that would eventually break down for us. As the product itself got more complex and as we added more engineers to the team, we didn't hit a wall, but it started to get really, really hard to make changes. And so, that was around the time that Jordan was on the ads team, and he's like, I wonder, there's got to be a better way.
น่าจะมีวิธีดีกว่านี้นะฮะก็เลย Who is Jordan walk fail
Jordan is an enigmatic figure. He's a little secretive, so there's not much that I know about him.
Jordan and I aren't necessarily, we haven't necessarily been in the spotlight much, especially Jordan kind of shied away from spotlights since the early days.
Jordan was a product engineer at the time working on ads. And ads has one of the most complicated pieces of UI across all of Facebook at the moment.
On the ads team, they were hitting really hitting the limits of what you can do without React, complexity-wise, and just the developer's ability to hold in their head and understand a bit of code that somebody else wrote and look at the screen and say, okay, this code is doing that and I need to know why. And Jordan had a lot of very interesting ideas around how you could take what we had done in Bolt and make it much more functional and make it more make it easier for it to scale with people's ability to understand large applications. And so we had a lot of ongoing dialogue, and he would come back and forth to us with various ideas how to change it. I think one of the original names for React was F-Bolt, which is functional bolt.
He saw that there was an opportunity to do it, to solve some of the tricky parts in Bolt in an easier way.
So what Jordan decided to do, or at least the story that he had told me, was, hey, wouldn't it be easier if anytime anything happened in the app, API state changes, user type something, we just blow away the entire UI and we re-render all of it.
เขาบอกว่ามันจะดีกว่าไหมถ้าเกิดว่าเวลาแบบมีอะไรเปลี่ยนแปลงเงี้ย UI state เหมือนเมื่อกี้ฮะที่เขายกตัวอย่างให้ดูสมมุติเราคลิกเราเล่น Facebook อยู่ใช่ป่ะเราคลิกอะไรปุ๊บแล้วมันอัปเดตเลยอะไรเงี้ย
If you look at what every other framework was doing at the time, it was called two-way data binding, and this was not that. It was like, forget about data binding. We're not going to do that at all. Anytime anything changes, we're just going to re-render. And then there's an asterisk which says, well, we're not going to re-render everything. We're going to try to render as little as possible, but conceptually, we're not going to manage these relationships between views and models. We're just going to...
Honestly, I thought it was completely crazy. At the time, I was really down on frameworks in general, and I thought there was no way that was going to work.
To many people, that seemed like magic. It was so far outside of everybody's idea of how things should work and do work that, it took a lot of convincing.
Took a lot of convincing. London.
Okay, let's go.
I've been working at Facebook for 10 years now. I met this person called Jordan Walk. Some people told me he had an interesting project about JavaScript and I may be interested. And so I had this meeting with him. And one thing he asked me at the beginning of the meeting was, what is the most difficult thing to do in the front end right now? And I mean, I was 6 months out of school. I was like, I don't know. And the thing he told me is updates. You need to find the DOM node that is going to change. You need to like change the listener to like the click event and like remove it and like do all of this, which is like pretty complicated. And then this was also like a massive source of bugs within the Facebook code base. I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. Like this is probably like the hardest thing. And he was like, I have a solution for this. I was like, okay, this guy is crazy. Like this is never going to work. It's never going to be performant. The meeting ended. For like a few weeks, I forgot about the idea. But one weekend I was like, okay, maybe I should try this. Like maybe there's something to it. Before joining Facebook, I worked on a way to find your guilds in World of Warcraft. And we basically need to search through like 20,000 guilds. And I did like a lot of performance work to like be the fastest way to display possible when you change all of those filters. It was real time. And I was like, okay, I spent like months full time like working on like making this super performant. Let's try it with React. And in practice, it took me like half an hour to write it. And it was actually like not as performant, but like around the same order of magnitude as performant. And I was like mind blown. And to this day, I became like the biggest React fan in the world. I was in the photos team and like spending all of my waking hours like trying to like use React for my own project on the photos team, evangelizing. I felt like it could change the world, which it did.
Jordan is making headway on his project. He's gotten others involved and they're seeing the value. But not everyone is impressed. One manager started to take notice, but saw Jordan's project as a distraction. So they asked Lee Byron to meet with Jordan and put a stop to it.
We get into a room. Instantly I knew that this was going to be weird because we showed up with very different energies. So I'm showing up with this like, okay, Jordan, I want to understand what's going on with your project, but I also want to help make sure that we are spending our time well and we're working on things that are going to have longevity and solve the problems we want to have. And Jordan came in with like, can I show you a demo of what I've been working on? Like, this is so exciting, and it does this and it does that. And eventually, like towards the end of this meeting with him, I had to kind of admit, like, he had something really compelling. Like, I was now really interested in learning more about what he was doing. So Jordan's pitch to me was like, I only want to invest in this and work on it if it's going to be something that people will use. And if that's not going to be the case, like, sure, we're not going to do this. He's like, but I feel really strongly that all the ways we've been doing UI development up until now have been flawed. Whether they're a JavaScript library that doesn't quite work for us, or whether it's like a 30-year-old tried and true model for doing UI application development, like they all suffer from the same base problem of state management. And I think this is the way forward. And Lee, if you could just like dig into the code and learn more and try it, and then come back and we'll talk about this again, then we can figure this out. And it's like, all right. And so I did. I dug around the code, and it was a little hard to understand, but eventually got to play with it, got to build a couple of things, and like had to admit coming away that like, yes, there was something like incredibly interesting there. And that was how I got sucked into the project. I ended up working on it quite a bit for the next couple of months.
Lee brings this like rigor and sort of design mentality to these things that really helped with the initial versions of React in terms of standardizing it and turning it from something that was kind of like an ugly baby that had just grown up at Facebook to something that really people could approach from around the world.
There were a couple of problems that I faced right away when trying to understand the code base and build something. Not only was the set of tools and the mental models really different from what I was used to as a UI engineer, the syntax and the programming, just like concepts involved, just the terminology was also really different. My takeaway was, okay, the whole bid here was that this would be simpler, but I can't help but feel like this is really complicated. Mostly as a desire for me to understand the model, but also with a hope that it would kind of end up helping resolve some things. I wanted to build like a glossary. Like, what are all the things, the concepts, and then what are all the like actions or like verbs that are going on here? And so I literally just like listed them all out. And then I would go back to Jordan, I'd go back to other people working on it and ask questions like, did I get this right? Are these definitions right? And they go, yeah, okay. No, you should really think about it that way. And I'd be like, okay, well, that's not how this, and it would go back and forth, and I'd be honing these definitions. And along the way, I would realize like, oh, this concept and that concept are the same. We're gonna name them one thing instead of two things. So unwinding all of this and essentially writing up what ended up being like a reimagining of the component lifecycle and therefore sort of the entire front-facing API for React. And I was very happy to see like incredible enthusiasm around that. Jordan was like, oh, this is amazing. This really clarifies the ideas. At that point, a handful of other folks had gotten involved with the project too. And then I spent sort of the next month or so sort of piece by piece, folding those into place and pretty significantly changing the surface API of React in the process. That was, I think, the first shift from this being a thing that existed mostly in Jordan's head that other people were playing with to a thing that all of a sudden felt owned by the whole team. Where team here is like a collection of UI engineers scattered across Facebook who were sort of bought in on this vision, who now felt that like, we now have the same terminology we can use when someone has a question. Anyone can jump in and answer it rather than only Jordan. That was the first big shift.
One of the first projects that React was used for was the UFI, the Universal Feedback Interface, which is basically likes, comments, and shares at the bottom of each post.
This was still during Facebook's kind of web era, when Facebook on the web was like the sort of big driver of engagement.
Newsfeed had 1 billion people hitting it every day and was massively tuned for performance.
Heavily interactive surface, both on the input side, of course, you're like clicking it to add likes, you're typing into it to add comments, but also on the receiving side, we want comments to come in live. So as you're looking at it, as a comment comes in, we want it to just whoop, pop up right there. And there was this product desire for that interface to feel almost like a one-off chat thread. And that was so cool at that time. And as that started to work, the second thread was, well, okay, if this can work for this really isolated sense of messaging, then what if it could work for messaging as a whole? And this was another really complicated and fraught with bug surface area.
That was when a lot of the ideas in React congealed. The JSX syntax was introduced, and some of the ideas about how to work with data in React sort of were clarified.
A couple of our UI engineers, along with the messaging team, if I remember correctly, Jing Chen was sort of the champion of this project, realized that we needed a completely new way to think about state too.
So my name is Jing, and I'm a software engineer on the product infrastructure team at Facebook.
Flux is an application architecture designed around React's principle of unidirectional data flow. Paired with Flux, React could go beyond the view layer to model entire applications.
This shift in how to think about state paired very well with how React was thinking about updating UI, and ended up being sort of the next chapter for how to think about React being more than just how do you model complicated UI, but how do you model sufficiently complicated applications. Like this was something that expanded the full screen and multiple touch points and had navigation to it, and it allowed us to step into that next chapter.
I remember asking Jing, like, hey, how's it going with this React stuff? Do you think this is gonna work? She was like, yeah, this is pretty good. I'm pretty sure it's gonna work. That was when I became more convinced.
What's on your mind, Mark? I'm excited to share news that we have agreed to acquire Instagram post.
Instagram joined Facebook in 2012.
I think we had started calling it React by then. And there was a couple engineers from Facebook that went to join Instagram to help them expand the product offering. At the time, Instagram was just an iOS and an Android app, and they wanted to have a web presence as well.
I spent 11 years in San Francisco. It was really fun, made a lot of great friends, but the change of pace out in the countryside is great. It's just very peaceful and nice. I went to Facebook straight out of school. I studied computer science undergrad, and I got a master's degree. Facebook was, believe it or not, the cool place to work back in 2010. It was like this great product that everybody used, and it was super cool on college campuses. And I was really excited to work there. I joined Facebook Video. The pitch was, we're the third largest video site in the world after YouTube and Dailymotion, I think. And there was one engineer working on it, and you get to be engineer number 2. And I was like, that sounds pretty cool. We worked really closely with the iOS photos team and the Android photos team, and we were building an Instagram killer. And nobody remembers this, but it was called Facebook Camera. One morning, the photos team got called into the office early. They said, be at HQ at 8 a.m. And then the VP of engineering was like, hey, we bought Instagram. They're your new coworkers now. And these were our people that they were our fierce competitors. We looked at them a little bit as the enemy. I'm sure they looked at us a little bit as the enemy.
They were a really small team at the time. They had their core fundamentals really nailed, but there was a lot of stuff they needed to figure out that they did not have the team to figure out on their own. And a big one of those was, what does it mean for Instagram to be on the web?
The web experience is really important for driving growth, and so this was a pretty important priority. And so me and this designer, Michael Lumens, started building all the web stuff. And that's kind of where React enters the picture, is when we started developing this website. We were given this mandate to use client rendering. So I went to the product infrastructure team at Facebook, which was run by Tom Okino.
Product infrastructure's role was to support any team that needed help and do it in a way that your key indicators of success are going to be other teams saying, yeah, that really helped us.
You go to them and you kind of consult the council of elders, and they give you their recommendation. And I said, hey, we need to do client rendering. What do we do? And the recommendation at the time was, we don't know. We've got 3 different things that we're working on. You should go try one. We had something called Bolt.js. There was a second thing called JS.html.
JS.html.
And then there was this thing called React.
You went and spoke to Jordan about using React, and he came and talked to me about potentially using Bolt for it. But I think he really, really liked Jordan's ideas around functional programming.
The conceptual model of React was crazy innovative, and it really, really spoke to me. My background was in distributed systems. I was not somebody that loved front end or thought front end was doing things well. So the fact that React came in with a totally fresh approach and didn't really care too much about existing best practices, I was on board with that. So while I had evaluated all 3, I really just dove in on React to build a prototype first. And that ended up shipping on Instagram.com, which was the second use of React in production ever, and the first use of building a full application end-to-end in React.
Instagram.
When I chose React for Instagram, it was not well known within Facebook, and it was this kind of crazy science experiment.
Was React ready to be used at Instagram at this point?
Not even close. By the time Instagram was, and Pete started playing with it, it was significantly better than it was in the early stage, but it still needed a ton of iteration.
We had to take this thing that was very much tied to Facebook's infrastructure, which back then was a big giant PHP application, and I had to go get that working in a Django application, which is a totally different system. And what was key was not doing that once, but making that a repeatable process and making sure that pipeline didn't break.
I think he hit a number of really interesting problems along the way, which quite proved the fact that React was not quite ready for that scale. And along the way, Pete and the team that he was working with ended up building a lot of really interesting things.
Jag ska bara filma den här dokumentären här. Annars är det bra, eller? Ja, men vi ses i 10.
MDNet Zero ครับผม
Ja, ha det bra. Some of these products ended up being fairly successful. There were relatively short time to deliver a relatively high quality product. That showed that this model could work. And it was not just that, but people liked developing, using it. And so that kind of spread and took off. And especially as you got more and more investment, it became clear that this was what we wanted to use. And it was really ads that was kind of using Bolt more. It had a higher level of investment, more people working in that code base that already knew it, and more components. So it was a harder shift to make.
The ads team, just before I joined ads from the mobile team, had done a full rewrite of the ads creation flow into Bolt, which took them, I think, upwards of 6 months, replacing a very old PHP application with what at the time was considered a very modern JavaScript application. But at the same time, React was also now actually deployed for real on Facebook and had a team that was forming around it. So we now had 2 viable frameworks that were both live on Facebook, both solving real problems. We shouldn't have 2, especially 2 that were similar enough to confuse people. Like if you looked at their code almost looked identical, but that worked really differently. It would actually be an absolute nightmare if you had to work in both. So we had to decide which to use. A lot of this ended up being a conversation between myself and Jordan. We did an evaluation of both of them, a lot of performance-based stuff, and trying to figure out where the edge cases were. On the pro side of React, obviously, there's all the things that we know now. It handles complexity way, way more. Even when writing the ads creation flow in Bolt, we had already hit one place that you just could not do in Bolt without writing spaghetti code, and you can do in React. So we knew in the future, even if it was only 10% of the experiences we were building, we're going to run into this problem again. Now, it might only be 10% unmaintainable, but as you scale that across a company that is growing rapidly, this becomes an absolute mess. The cons of it, on the other hand, were that React, in a lot of ways, was not battle tested yet. There's a lot of things that simply didn't work in React. It couldn't handle forms. They'd never done a text box. And there's a lot of complexities around handling awkward form controls like radio buttons and so on that it messed up. Just performance issues where it would try and re-render large blocks. So they hadn't had to do all of the performance improvements that obviously exist now. On the organizational side, the other con was that we had just done the 6-month rewrite in Bolt. Facebook had done an IPO recently, and the stock had halved since IPO. Facebook wasn't making enough money. And so the ads team is the team that makes, that's where the money starts. If we stop for 4 months, we're going to have to tell everybody, sorry, no money for you. So there was a lot of conversation back and forth about all this, and it got very difficult.
Initially, a lot of the engineers that used Bolt, including Shane, realized just what you said. Like, look, we've invested so much in this thing, and it's really worked for all this stuff. Certainly, we can work through the next set of challenges we're having. So initially, there was opposition to React coming in and saying, like, how are you going to, this new thing that's not even proven yet? This is our business. This is really important.
When Jordan and I were working through it, there was definitely some emotions there. And mostly I think it came from each of us having a lack of context of where the other one was coming from. So I think there was a lot of talking past each other. In the end, Mike Schrupfer stepped in and said, look, make the right technical decision, make the right long-term decision, and whatever it is, I'll back you up. But if you need to pause product development for 4 months, you can. We all kind of just got in rooms and, worked through all these things and got everything out in the air of, what's a technical problem, what's an organizational problem, what's a financial problem, and came to the understanding eventually with lots and lots of coffee that React was the right way to go. But it was not a straight line at all.
He ultimately was one of the biggest proponents and decision makers in ads switching over everything to React.
And that doesn't happen in most companies. In most companies, if that's your baby project, you try to undermine the upstart because you're really defensive over your own thing. That was not the vibe at Facebook at the time, and I think that Shane in particular really exemplified that.
There was still a lot of work to do on the ads creation flow. Tensions were mounting, and the team was stuck. Here again to get them unstuck is Jing Chen.
we'd have this thorny management issue and a lot of people disagreeing with each other up and down the management chain on both sides of, in ads and in this product infrastructure group that was building React. And we'd send Jing in to talk to the engineers, and everyone come out like patting each other on the back, full agreement, a plan to move forward. So she's great at building a consensus because she's able to drill into the important technical details, identify them really quickly, and get everyone talking about the same thing.
She basically helped both build the product, but she also made sure that every time we found a bug in React or just something it didn't handle yet, she either stepped back from product and then just fixed the framework, or she went back to the team and said, look, we need 2 or 3 engineers working on this stuff for the next month to unblock the ads team.
The ads manager was complicated enough that it actually ended up being a really great source of performance improvements and finding like where are the true points where it doesn't quite scale. So I think it was a lot of like using the building blocks that we had, and as you start to assemble them into a really complicated looking application, what are the new problems that come out of that we need to solve? And there was definitely a lot of those.
This was one of the most fun, intense periods of my career as I remember it. We would be going to meet with the team and we would have to help them put some feature in. And we would code it up ourselves first in React just to make sure that they wouldn't hit any rough edges, or more like to find all the rough edges that we knew they'd hit and figure out what the solutions would be. So it was really exciting because we were working on 2 things at the same time. One was delivering this really complicated, really important software project for Facebook, the ads manager, and the other was refining this framework that we really believed in, which was React.
By the time we had rebuilt the ads creation flow, which I think took about 4 months, it had been battle tested with basically everything about browser supports, all the form fields and everything, and also massive performance issues that had all been resolved. So at that point, it was kind of felt that it was ready to be open source because we used it in multiple different types of contexts, and that it would actually be generally useful to the public.
What'd you say, Ewan?
Is there a product
There is not. Sorry. Open sourcing React was never a question for me. That was the goal from the very beginning. Tom had this idea, he called it project perception. And he was really angry, I think is probably the best word for it. He was angry that Facebook was hiring all of these luminaries from the JavaScript world. They would come to Facebook and because we discouraged people from writing client-side JavaScript and because it was a hard environment to maneuver in, they would actually go pick up mobile because that was where a lot of the interesting client-side development was happening. And Tom was determined to change this around.
I remember going to this conference and I was talking to someone and I told them I worked at Facebook on JavaScript, and they're like, why would you do that? I hate what Facebook does to the JavaScript industry. You have hired all these really great people from these really great projects, and we have no idea what they're working on now. They've given nothing back. So I think when React came along, I started very early on talking about, if this thing works for us, I really want us to find a path to open source. And I was running that up the management chain very early. So when the time came to open source it, there were some meetings. It was controversial, but we had all the support we needed already.
The process of open sourcing is interesting. There's first a technical problem to solve. You have to figure out how to extract it out of your infrastructure and make it work in the open source, which is all the homework that we did for Instagram. We made this call that we will not impact developer productivity at all. It's going to be entirely on the open source team, which was just a bunch of people that wanted to open source it, to make it work. Then actually pulling the trigger on open source, we had to write a lot of documentation.
We spent actually a lot of time with the documentation to explain hey, what is React, what are all the concepts, and we tried to put ourselves in the shoes of somebody that wants to build an app. How do we give the documentation in a way that helps them do that?
Paul Shaughnessy did a lot of this because he really had experience with what the ecosystem needed to make this work at the time.
Paul Shaughnessy was a huge force on open sourcing, as was James Pierce, who was the head of Facebook open source. James had joined the company, and he really wanted to change Facebook's open source image. We had previously open sourced a lot of stuff, but we had let it rot. We would say, hey, we're an open source company. Here's our great framework, and then we would just never maintain it. And James and Paul in particular were like pretty instrumental in saying, hey, if we're going to open source React, we're going to do it right.
Internally, there was a lot of excitement because we had already been using this thing for a while, and it was working for us. We were excited about it.
We chose JSConf US, which was kind of the Oscars of JavaScript. Is that fair representation, maybe? You know, all the celebrities are there, and everyone's paying attention, and everybody watches it live on YouTube.
Tom and Jordan put together this presentation.
Tom is a great speaker, and Jordan is a brilliant engineer. It was like Lennon and McCartney type of situation. There was no way that this thing could possibly fail.
There was no way. No way.
It was in Florida at like 9 a.m. We were in Menlo Park, and we woke up early. We took the first bus into the office. It was completely empty, and we're like getting ready to like press the button on the repo to open source it.
Jordan and I were all excited. We got up on stage.
I'm going to talk a bit about how we do JavaScript application development at Facebook.
It was a little unconventional. I did a little bit of it. He did more of it.
So along with React, we are shipping an embeddable XML syntax, and we're calling that JSX.
And we jumped into showing some code, and that code looked different. It looked weird.
Here we have React used with JSX.
And people were rightfully skeptical, we'll call it.
Everyone hated it. Everyone thought it was awful.
เห็นปะมีคนไม่เห็นด้วยเต็มเลยไม่ชอบด้วยตอนแรกๆนะ
Internally, we were expecting a much better reception, or at least oh, that's interesting exception. We thought there'd be some language nerds in there who would think, oh, I can do fully functional programming UI. Oh, at least that's interesting.
It was a really humbling experience. It was kind of a letdown for us because we had worked nights and weekends on getting this thing open sourceable, and then when we go to launch it, everyone hated it.
The thing that everyone focuses on is that people really hated JSX.
I haven't watched this video in a while. It's bad. Let's see.
These divs are not exactly what you're used to. They're not DOM nodes. So they're special React divs. And I'll get to why that's important.
I don't remember thinking that they were hating it. I don't remember at all thinking that they were like tweeting a bunch of stuff. This is the slide for sure. We haven't talked about any problems we're trying to solve. We haven't talked about why this is working for us or what were the principles of design. We're just like, boom, here's some XML in your JavaScript. And people are like, wait, what is happening? Poor Jordan.
Poor Jordan.
What we didn't really fully understand was how big of a delta there was between where the rest of the world was in the JavaScript community and where Facebook was. I don't blame them. I don't think anybody who tweeted Facebook is crazy was crazy themselves. I think they were kind of right. We were a little crazy. I think there was a moment for me personally where I felt like, you know, my goal with the open sourcing of this was to get us closer to the community, and I may have set us back a step. I may have demonstrated that we actually have no idea what we're doing, because what we're doing is so much different than what the rest of the community was doing. And internally there was well, we messed that up. We made the wrong call. Because I think the measure of success would have been, wow, Facebook engineering is doing some really cool stuff, and instead it was Facebook engineering has no idea what they're doing.
I think that JSConf appearance might have been Jordan's last conference for a good few years. I think Tom Okino didn't go back for a while as well. It turned into a bit of a troll fest for no good reason, and particularly for something that was as innovative and useful and, you know, just fantastic for developer productivity, and just it's literally a gift to everybody here. Move faster for free. To have people misunderstand it and say all these bad things about it that were just, you know, knee-jerk reactions without actually having taken time to think about it, must have felt very bad, especially because both Jordan and Tomo had already gone through all this internally in Facebook for 2 years. But inside in Facebook, it's a smaller scale. You can just get in a meeting room and talk about it. But you can't really do that with the whole world, can you?
There were some technical decisions that were made as part of React that were self-evident within Facebook, but were like crazy when given to a different audience in the community. So there was this notion of separation of concerns.
At the time, like you shouldn't put your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in the same file. Like you should really extract them out, and you should like have this separation. And so this was like very like the best practice at the time.
What was interesting about the approach to separation of concerns in React is that you separate your concerns into different components. So rather than saying I have my view concerns over here and my model concerns over here, you say you have your newsfeed concerns over here, your photo concerns over here, your admin panel concerns over here. So it's a different way of separating concerns.
And so there was like a lot of backlash around like, oh, those people at Facebook are clowns, like they don't know how to write software and everything.
We thought that React probably had no future outside of Facebook.
It looked like all hope was lost for our friends at the Facebook office. But fortunately, someone outside of Facebook was willing to give it a chance.
When I first started using React in 2013, it was not popular in the community. It had just been announced at JSConf. I saw the announcement post on Hacker News and immediately thought that it would be helpful for one of the projects that I was working on at the time. I was building an interactive math question editor at Khan Academy, and it was something that had a very component-oriented architecture. I was trying to use Backbone.js at the time and found that the state management was getting a little bit hard. And when I looked at React, I thought to myself, wow, this actually looks like it solves a lot of the problems that I have right now. I'm looking at this post from 2013 that I guess I wrote a week after I learned about React, and it was right after I had started trying to use it. And somebody had asked, how is Facebook's React JavaScript library? And I was a few days into using it, and so I decided to write an answer to that question based on my experience. The answer I wrote is very positive. I think I was having a really good time using it, and it was solving my needs really well. One line from the post says, I just rewrote a 2,000-line project in React and have now made a handful of pull requests to React. Everything about React I've seen so far seems really well thought out, and I'm proud to be the first non-Facebook production user of React. And I talked a little bit more about some of the technical details and how it was helping me. It's cool to look back, and it's almost a bit of a time capsule to see how even 1 week into React being released, I was already pretty excited about it, and I think that excitement lasted for a long time. I converted my entire code base that I was working on at the time over to React. I think it ended up being less code, and it was easier to understand, and it was faster. Pretty quickly, I said, okay, I want to keep using React, and I ended up deploying that to production, my rewritten code, and that was, I think, the first production code using React outside of Facebook. It was a brand new project. It had just been open sourced, and not many people had used it before, and so there were a bunch of rough edges. It seemed like, maybe nobody had tried to use it in a particular way before, or if something just wasn't documented well enough and I was trying to use it a slightly different way than it was intended, I ran into these little bugs or issues where it didn't work quite as I was expecting it to. For some of those, I read through the source code and tried to figure out, okay, why isn't this working? Is there anything that I can be doing differently? For other cases, I ended up joining the IRC chat channel where a lot of the core team members were hanging out after it had been open sourced. They helped me get started not just using React, but also starting to contribute to it as I started filing issues and helping other people who were in that chat room. as well as starting to make small code changes and starting to improve React over time.
Her perspective from Khan Academy and just being outside of Facebook was so valuable, so helpful.
Sophie started as someone using React externally, then sort of like moved on to being someone who contributed to React Core externally, then became the most significant contributor to React Core. Then we would have these like weekly team meetings and invite Sophie to come. And so Sophie like worked out with her local manager at her company to like carve out Friday afternoons to come to Facebook and hang out with us.
And so determined not to do what we had done previously, where we hired folks from the open source community, and then they never contributed anything back. She became like the first ever like open source recruited member of the team.
Sophie's involvement lifted the spirits of the React team. It also got them thinking that maybe, just maybe, the rest of the ecosystem had dismissed React unfairly. They had something special. They knew it. What they didn't know was how to convince everyone else.
I think there are people on the team like me and Jordan and Tom and Chris Shadow who like the challenge and the competitive nature of it. We knew that this was good technology. And I was so sure of that I viewed it as just a messaging problem. Okay, we got to crack how we message this to people because they don't get it and we have to figure out how to bring them there.
The open source feels like a milestone and feels like this is the end, when in practice it's just the beginning. Because when you open source, you actually have 0 users. Now you need to actually like build a community, get all of the bug fixed, like make sure it actually solves the use case for the people. And so this is like when the journey begins.
We buckled down. And we also realized, I think, that really when you have a project like this that's different, you have to convince people one by one. So I think that's really what we focused on. And we learned a lot doing that. We learned that the ideas in React are solid, but really the ideas are not what people encounter when they adopt a framework. What they encounter are the docs and the error messages. What they need more than anything else when they adopt something is an incremental way of doing that.
So the team got to work. They focused on spreading the knowledge of React one concept at a time, one person at a time. Then an opportunity arose. Another conference.
Later the same year, thank goodness, Pete gave a talk at JSConf EU.
I had my desk over by the product infrastructure team. I was sitting next to Tomo, and he's like, we're just like sponsoring this JSConf EU conference, and like we have to give a keynote, and like I don't want to give it. Because I think he was like, he didn't want to go through all that stuff. Because, after you give the talk, like people go and yell at you after you get off stage and you go to the happy hour and stuff. It's like, it's not the most pleasant thing in the world. And I was like, I'll do it. I'll take the free trip to Berlin and go give a talk at a conference.
Hey, I'm Pete. I'm going to talk to you about a library for creating user interfaces that we call React. And we open sourced this at JSConf US a couple months ago. And we got some kind of sarcastic responses on Twitter, a little bit of snickering, that kind of thing. We weren't really communicating what we were doing. So I'd like to talk to you today about the design decisions around React, what we're doing differently than other frameworks, and kind of the implementation that lets us make these decisions and make it really fast.
For this talk, it was like, here's what makes React different. I'm not even trying to say it's good. I'm not even trying to say you should use it. I'm trying to say that this is interesting. And there's a lot of interesting stuff about how this thing works that you should pay attention to. And that really resonated with people. And so we got these kind of early innovators. If you think of the crossing the chasm diagram where you've got your early adopters and then you've got your laggards, and in the middle you have your kind of normal companies. That talk really got those early adopters fired up and evangelizing React inside of their own companies.
After Pete's talk, interest started to pick up. People started paying attention. They just wanted to, let me just see if there's something there. And so we got this kind of like slow burn of adoption of React.
And it prompted some really interesting conversations. It recruited Brandon Bloom into the community, who came from the functional programming world somewhere. He started talking to his friends and said, hey, I think this like React thing is actually worth paying attention to. And then he goes and talks to his friend David Nolan, who is this very well-known, very well-respected, really great musician and JavaScript developer. I think he was working at the New York Times at the time, and I was passing through New York to do something and grabbed coffee.
And I asked Pete some questions, and Brandon Bloom, that was my friend, that said you should really look at React. And the reason I was excited about it, more than I think you could have been if you were a JavaScript developer. JavaScript is kind of multi-paradigm. You can do object-oriented, you can do functional if you want, but it's not required. But in Clojure and ClojureScript, functional is the most idiomatic thing, and nothing existed. Like we were sort of like always trying to get things to work, but it was always felt like there was friction.
I was like still early in my career, right? And this is like really senior, super smart engineer. And it was the type of thing where like he would ask me questions about it, and I would like stumble to explain it, and I would explain it poorly, and then he would repeat it back to me in like a super eloquent, great way. And I was like, yes, I'm gonna steal that.
And so when I sat with Brandon and Pete, it was like this huge light bulb went off. I was like, finally, this is so random. Facebook made this functional UI framework. Eureka. I mean, it was definitely a eureka moment. It did allow ClojureScript programmers to finally write reasonably performant functional UIs. And it was very natural. It was a very, very good fit.
Like a week or two later, he wrote this blog post called The Future of JavaScript MVCs that just like changed the trajectory of the project.
In many ways, you look at React and you're like, there's no way this could be fast. There's no way it could be efficient. And then I showed like, you know, these diagrams of what Backbone and React Om look like. And React is much better, especially when you're using persistent data structures. So my article, I think, was focusing purely on the technical benefits of the design. It removed the superficial consideration, and I think people started saying, okay, I will try it. Not I'm going to use it, but it removed that I'm never going to use that to, oh, I'll give it a shot. This is interesting.
Once that post came out, like within 3 months after that, I would say that we were one of the big contenders if you were picking a JavaScript framework.
If you want to spread an idea, you need to really convince a few people and have those people share your message. You can't just be shouting at yourself.
More people started to realize that React had some good ideas and made UI development simpler in a lot of ways.
Over the course of the next, I would say like year or two, we're kind of just tracking things like, you know, like Google alerts of how many times is it being mentioned, who's writing about it, what projects are cropping up. Because React was very unopinionated about a lot of stuff that you need in order to build a front-end web application. And, you know, people would fill in the blanks. And there was a bunch of state management libraries that cropped up, and there was a bunch of, you know, router libraries that cropped up, and server-side rendering strategies. And so there was this sort of slow burn of adoption over the next year or two.
React is a small, focused UI library, but it proved capable when tackling Facebook's hardest problems, and other big companies noticed. But there was one company especially eager to rethink best practices.
We first heard about React back in 2014. The Netflix website had been built using Java Web. It was very slow. It took about 15 minutes to get up a build, and we decided to move to a more modern framework. There we go. Now, at the time, we weren't quite sure if this React thing was going to work out. It was kind of new, and so we were very apprehensive, especially since we were building the future of the next 10 years of the website, right? We make a bad choice now, we got to backtrack years worth of work. And so we were very careful about not jumping into something that was too bleeding edge. And so what they did was they actually pitted two teams against each other. Each was given 30 days to build a prototype, with one being React and the other one being Backbone. And after 30 days, the choice was clear. So thank you all for coming out tonight. We're really excited to have you here and share the learnings that we've had building the new UI in React for the past year. It was not this stage, it was our next stage over where I gave my React presentation back, I guess, in 2015. Same feeling, like, oh my goodness, I've got to convince all these people that React is amazing. But I guess it worked. So I was part of the team that built the new site using React. At first, it was very clunky, like you're writing components and they're not quite, you're putting too much logic into them or you're thinking too big. It's not clear the difference in the paradigm. And then you start to use it and you go, oh, okay, wait. I'm thinking much more atomic, hence the symbol of React. I'm thinking about this individual reusability. Okay, now I'm thinking about the testability of these components. I'm seeing the benefits now come out of it. I can reuse this over here, we can test this over here, we can change this here, we can add props in here. And it becomes very exciting to see that new paradigm come to play and go, this is going to be revolutionary. This is going to change the world. Let's go back in time 1 year to the old Netflix UI. You guys might remember this one. The overall look and feel is kind of like this old DVD kind of box art feel. And so I actually want to show you one of the early prototypes of what we thought the new UI would look like. We knew that going forward, the world was changing, web was changing, things were moving faster, and our competition was moving faster as well. So choosing React and going with a more modern framework really helped us accelerate how fast we could build the website, how fast we could get new changes out the door, how fast we could try improvements for our customers to make the best possible experience. And because of that, we've been at the forefront of leading what UI design looks like in terms of web development. We've had a lot of companies copy us, which we take as a great compliment, but we were there first because of React and its ability to move so quickly in terms of design. This is how it ended up turning out. And this is a UI that's big and immersive and completely built in React. So we're very, very proud of it and the result.
Netflix was now praising React publicly, and with a second big company betting big on React, the framework grew in popularity. In fact, it kind of took on a life of its own, and the community started to take off.
React at this point was getting more popular. And somebody on Twitter mentioned like, hey, it would be cool to have like a React conference. And a lot of people started like commenting and tweeting and everything about this. And I went to my manager, Tom Okino.
And he was like, there's like 50 tweets about React a day. Like, people are talking about organizing conferences. Should we organize a conference? And I was like, I don't know what that means. I don't know how to do that, but like maybe.
I was very opposed to doing a conference. I thought it was very cool that we got so much traction without really pouring marketing money into it. Even though React came from big tech company juggernaut Facebook, it was a small group of people that were like really dedicated to seeing this thing succeed. So it felt like this very indie, Rebel Alliance type of project. And so I was like, we don't need a user conference. Like we got this cool vibe going on. Like, let's see how far we can push it. I was totally wrong.
We had said to ourselves, I think it would be fun to host a React conference, but are there even enough people using React who would want to go to that? And eventually we decided, well, let's try it. Let's try to host the conference and see how it goes.
Within a minute, all of the tickets were sold out, and we actually crashed the website that we handled for like the actual payment system and everything. Trep, the CTO of Facebook, actually reached out to me saying like, hey, I have this very important VP or CTO or like of some company that wants in and couldn't get in, like, hey, can you do us a favor? And I was like, I would love to, like, you're the CTO and everything, but like, no, like we're like completely booked.
Certainly we were very surprised about how quickly the tickets had sold out. We didn't realize just how much the React ecosystem had grown and just how much enthusiasm had been created by early adopters.
It came together fairly quickly as far as conference planning goes, and we just had it on campus in one of our cafes, and we, bussed people from the nearest hotel, and it was very, very underproduced. But it worked out really, really well.
Good morning, everyone. Whoops. And welcome to ReactJS Conf. The conference went extremely well. As the organizer of the conference, I'm so excited to be here. And we open sourced a bunch of our projects, so React Native, and we started talking about GraphQL, about Relay. And so, yeah, it's been a massive success.
There is this moment where you go and you see the stage, and it's there's a giant wood cutout logo of the React atom. And I was like, my friend Michael, the designer at Instagram, drew that in front of me in the middle of the night before we were going to open source this thing because we needed a logo. And I was like, Michael, just throw something together real quick. And now it's this thing that somebody has built a giant sign with this on it. And there's something about the physical impact of that that's really cool.
That was the moment when it dawned on me that React was becoming something different. So for a long time, what React was to me was a software project. And the reason why I wanted people to adopt it was because I really thought it would make their software better and make their lives better and make their on-call rotations better. There are a lot of reasons why I thought it would help them. After that conference, what I realized is that React was becoming a community.
There was meetups that would happen the immediate next week that would have an expanded audience that they could go deeper into some of the things that were discussed. It was really, really cool. And a huge recognition for us that the community was going to be an incredible part of what would make React work, and at that point was definitely already a really important part of what had gotten React to that point so far. It's proven to me that engaging with your open source community is actually more important than the technical work itself. If you don't have a community, you don't have an open source project.
I'm excited that we just continue rethinking best practices. I want to thank this community for making it possible for us to keep investing in this and keep working on it. That's all I got. Thanks.
It was a real high point for not just for me, but for the team. And, I think for Facebook engineering, I think we really felt not just validated, but we were actually doing something that people cared about. And it was a really, really good feeling.
It was already more widely used within the company, but now it was okay, how do we actually start converting everything to React? How do we remove and deprecate all of the other frameworks and really double down on React? Oh, hey, how's it going? Going from an interesting project to this is the next big thing. So it was really a really amazing time to be around and to really get the whole company working together as one in order to make this happen.
Let's see, I have some keepsakes up here, which will be not easy for me to get down, but let's see. I have some stickers. Oh, this is a fun one. This is the first ever React die cut sticker. We ordered a bunch of these and put them on our laptops, and I never wanted to use the last one that I had. Facebook open source stickers. Oh, some of these will be a trip down memory lane for folks. React Conf we made, 2018. Facebook open source, it's a good one. React Conf attendee badge. This was a book from the original ReactJS Conf at Facebook's headquarters. So this had a list of the speakers and the schedule, and here's the keynote. Me and Christopher Shadow. We had all sorts of swag made and a bunch of other stuff, so pretty good stuff. Pretty good memories.
After ReactConf, the team became inundated with questions from the community, and a new developer enters React's orbit.
นี่ไงโหเดี๋ยวสต็อปก่อนกำลังจะพูดว่าแดนอับรามอฟอยู่ไหนนะครับนี่ฮะมาตอนใกล้จะจบแล้ว
What should I do with my hands? So you're saying I should actually start let me focus for a second. Just for the record, I did not create React. React was created by Jordan Walk. I worked at a small startup we were creating a sort of a digital publishing platform. So there was a really complex post editor with different blocks or like scrollable text with like different effects and stuff. And so creating a dynamic kind of interactive editor for these things was really difficult, and we were doing it with Backbone. I kind of wanted to give React a try because it was supposed to solve this problem. The first React component I wrote was a like button. So it was just like a button, you click it and it says like, you like this, or you and somebody liked this, or you and like 40 others liked this. So there was a bit of like a split in logic, and then the way you would express this in like in other frameworks at the time, like you had to kind of manually like watch what's changed and like update it. And in React you could just say, if nobody liked this, show this. If one person liked this, show this. Otherwise, show this. And like it's a very natural way to write this kind of code. And yeah, I just wrote that button and I was like, yeah, that looks good, ship it. And so we actually rewrote the entire app in React over the course of like 9 months while still shipping new features. So React sped up our development so much that we were able to add new features faster at the same time as we were replacing old features. That's why I really kind of fell in love with it. A lot of things didn't exist back then. Like there was no such thing as a React ecosystem. So if you needed something, it didn't exist, you'd have to write it. So like you'd have to figure out how to do it, because otherwise you're not gonna have a product, right? So that's kind of what I did for a bunch of things. One of those projects in particular was like I just saw like a big opportunity there. It was called React Hot Loader at the time, so I wanted to give a talk about that. Somebody else has done a talk that mentioned it earlier at ReactConf.
A really clever fellow called Dan Abramov figured this out, and he created the React Hot Loader.
And I felt that, well, then that just wouldn't be interesting because people kind of already saw it, which in retrospect, I don't think it would be true, but that's how I saw it at the time. So I wanted to kind of spice it up a little bit, and I wanted to make a proof of concept of a thing I saw in Brett Victor's demo that is often referred to as time traveling.
If you're designing something embedded in time, you need to be able to control time. You need to be able to see across time. Otherwise, you're designing blind.
I didn't really know how to do it, but I thought that's a cool idea for a talk. So I'm gonna send the proposal. If the proposal is successful, then I'll just figure it out. And it turned out that the proposal was more successful than I thought it would be. And so I made a proof of concept for that, and that proof of concept became known as Redux.
So my talk is about developer tools, because React and hot loading and time travel, these are all developer tools.
He was like literally creating Redux in service of being able to deliver this talk, and I called it presentation-driven development. Because the thing that shook out of it was, you know, this sort of like canonical state management library for React apps for several years.
Most of my work is around the React ecosystem, because that's what inspired me to contribute to the open source in the first place. But there are two particular projects that I'm going to talk about today.
It was very validating to give that talk, but I was not surprised by the response because, well, I had my doubts, but also I thought the talk was good. Like, I thought it's a really good talk, and I was glad that people also liked it. But I think it was actually not the talk that was really like the moment for me. I think it was just like being there. It kind of felt like, you know, like going to Hogwarts for the first time. I think it kind of had this feeling because there were all these people who I only knew them as these avatars, and when you meet somebody in person, they kind of become three-dimensional, of course. You kind of see the whole picture. And I think it was just like such a wholesome feeling. It's the feeling that we are all trying to figure out what we can do with this thing, and we don't know it yet, and we're just playing with it. That's also where I met Jin Chen. I asked for her advice before because she's one of the co-creators of the Flux architecture. So it was nice to meet her in person, and she mentioned that actually Facebook is hiring in London. And so they arranged an interview for me right at the conference, which was like our normal interview process, the same, I think, like 4 interviews or something like this. But I missed the second day of the conference, but we just did an interview there. And so that's kind of how I got into Facebook.
We just quickly grabbed them out of the conference, a little bit like on the down low, and then conducted the interviews in the basement of a hotel, I think.
Is that normal on Facebook?
No, Dan is a little special. He's always been a little special.
I guess like I would think of myself as like maybe the first member of what would become the React team as you know it today, because I joined a little bit earlier than I think Andrew, Brian, Luna, and like a bunch of other people who work with us now. And I joined at the time when a few people who worked with us before were just about to leave. So I was kind of in this transitional period when the team was changing a lot.
I remember the old days.
Do you remember the first time you met Andrew?
I think I met.
I do.
I think I met him. But I remember
that was at ReactConf.
Yeah. Well, that was the clear moment. Maybe was that the first time we actually met?
Did you get invited to ReactConf because of that?
He had a speech.
I met him like, I think before that.
I met you and Sophie and Joe and Tim like all in the same week.
Yeah.
I think.
He started asking some questions that were very similar to the questions that on the team we were talking about internally. And so I just remember like, I got to connect you with like Sebastian and Jordan and the rest of the team.
Yeah.
And then also I was like to the recruiters, I was like, yeah, this guy, like we got to hire this Andrew guy. And I think we were really fortunate early on to have a bunch of people like you that kind of stepped up and they were like, this seems cool. I just want to be a part of this. I just want to help.
I didn't realize it was kind of like a freshman class sort of feeling at the time.
Sophie had just started managing the team.
Started managing the team around that time as well. And like, I couldn't have really asked for a better both project and like set of colleagues and team to join.
Sort of the beginning of phase 2.
Yeah. It's cool.
Awesome.
I feel like we really brought it home there at the end. I was like, man, we're nailing this.
React was now out of the hands of its founders. It was ready to take on new life in the care of a new, community-grown, and future-minded team.
We tried to watch some of the numbers, like the number of GitHub stars or the number of NPM downloads on Google Trends, how many people are searching for React. And none of those numbers are perfect, but basically all of them kept going up over time and eventually got to a point where we looked at it and said, oh yeah, like millions of people essentially are using React.
There are a lot of little details in how we did things that encourages an ecosystem to participate that were critical parts of making it what it is today. We didn't put everything in the framework. We left a lot of it to the ecosystem to innovate. And we got a lot of contributions. We got a lot of interest that way. We got a lot of things spurring from that.
It was not ever a foregone conclusion. It's still surreal to me that it's as popular as it is.
It's this great example of this like underdog technology within a big company where there could have been these forces that really push back on it.
I think a lot of elements of good timing, good fortune, good luck, good leadership support, all sort of like aggregated to allow React to be a success that had we missed a few of those or had a handful more things failed instead of succeeded, then I do not think React would be in the spot that it is today.
I feel like you can't take anyone out of it and have it be what it became. I think in the early days, obviously Jordan, right? Like this thing wouldn't exist. And then Jing Chen, just absolutely critical. I mean, she was so instrumental in the early days of React that it just wouldn't have been a thing that we cared about if it didn't prove itself. And then Shane O'Sullivan is responsible for, really, a very hard decision to like, I'm gonna go this path instead of that thing. And then the engineers that worked on refining and iterating on it and turning it into something good, it was Shadow and Paul O'Shaughnessy and Pete Hunt. And my manager, Adam Wolf, when I was like, asking all these questions about like, should we be is this even worth it? Especially after JSConf when we were feeling defeated, he was there to pick me back up and be like, no, look, it is delivering value. This is good. Keep going. And there's different phases too, right? You had the early days, and you had the for the next, literally almost, we're going on 10 years now with Sebastian's technical leadership and Andrew and Dan and Dominic and Flarney and Sophie. And I just feel like it's just a group of incredible people. And if you take any of them out of it, it just looks pretty different.
It was really a team effort. It was really a team effort from the very beginning.
Mishko Havery says that awesome solutions are rarely created by large organizations. It's almost always one person with passion and vision that slowly start to infect others. This is a great summary of how React became React, because it was never inevitable. It was always this wild idea that kept gathering momentum person by person. Many expected React to fail, and if it weren't for the hard work of a few determined developers, it very well could have. This is just the beginning of the React story. The story of how a community transformed an underdog UI library into the most popular JavaScript framework today. This is React Podcast. I'm Chantastic.
จบแล้วเหรอจบแล้วครับผมใครดูตั้งแต่แรกจนจบก็ได้ความรู้ไปเต็มๆเรียบร้อยสุดยอดว่ะเฮ้ยเดี๋ยวไม่จบ
I'm so tempted to just surprise FaceTime Jordan right now and be like, interview!
It's just really strange to think that you're just so close to death.
The first React t-shirt that we made.
Thousands of developers find jobs across Europe using Honeypot. If you're up for a new challenge in one of these European cities, sign up at honeypot.io. If you want to see more tech documentaries, then subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
จบจ้อยเป็นไงครับจบแล้วลงเมื่อประมาณ12ชั่วโมงที่แล้วนะครับใครที่อยากจะดูแบบพวกสารคดีเนี่ยมันจะมีหลายอันมากนะครับอย่างเช่น Vue.js the documentary GraphQL มีหลายอันอะมาติดตามช่อง Honeypot ได้นะครับนี่มีเขาไปสัมภาษณ์พวก developer หลายๆคนด้วยนะฮะ Chatbox Streamlab หายไม่ได้หายครับไม่ได้เอาขึ้นนะเพราะว่าเมื่อกี้พาดูสารคดีอยู่เดี๋ยวมันจะบังนะครับขอตัวไปงม database ก่อนนะฮะเดี๋ยวกลับมาดูย้อนหลังนะครับดีครับจ้าสวัสดีครับ17สามารถทำได้ไหมทำได้หมดครับผมอายุมันแค่อาจจะทำไม่ได้แค่ในบริษัทเพราะว่าบริษัทเขาก็ต้องรับคนมันอาจจะมีเกณฑ์อายุเขาแต่ถ้าเราอยากจะเริ่มทำเลยมันไม่เกี่ยวกับอายุนะครับมันก็เริ่มศึกษาเริ่มทำได้เลยนะครับเพราะว่าก็มีคนทำเยอะแยะอายุเท่าเรานะฮะแต่ถ้าพูดถึงไปทำงานบริษัทมันก็ต้องอันนี้อยู่แล้วรออายุถึงหรือเรียนจบอะไรเงี้ยหรือจริงๆถ้ามีคอนเนคชั่นมีอะไรมันก็อาจจะทำได้ไม่ต้องรอแบบอายุถึง20 21อะไรเงี้ยมันอยู่ที่เราจะหานะครับจบแล้วเดี๋ยว1ชั่วโมง24นาทีนะครับเดี๋ยวอาจจะพูดอีกแป๊บหนึ่งเดี๋ยวไปเอากินน้ำก่อน สวัสดีครับพี่โอสวัสดีครับผมน้องภูมิพัฒน์นะฮะโอเคนะฮะก็เดี๋ยวขอเปลี่ยนอันนี้หน่อยเปลี่ยนมาเป็นMacBook Pro Speaker ใช่ป่ะโอเคนะครับก็เชื่อว่าน่าจะมีไม่ถึงเมื่อกี้หันไปดูเหลือประมาณ 7-8 คนนะ ออกไปหมดแล้ว ใครดูจบก็นะครับดีอันนี้เป็นสารคดีที่ดีมากนะฮะก็ได้ฝึกภาษาได้อะไรไปด้วยนะครับเนี่ยมันคือเป็นเหมือนไอตัว ReactJS ตัวเนี้ยมันจะเป็นตัวที่เหมือนจะนานกว่าเพื่อนเลยนะครับเพราะว่ามันมีเรื่องราวมากมายนะครับแล้วก็ปัจจุบันนี้ถ้าถามว่าเราควรเรียนlibrary ตัวไหนดีนะครับแน่นอนก็จะมีคนบอกว่าเฮ้ยเรียน React นะครับเพราะว่ามันคนใช้เยอะนะครับคอมมูนิตี้แข็งแกร่งแล้วก็พวกบริษัทสตาร์ทอัพอะไรเงี้ยเขาก็จะรับคือมันมีตำแหน่งรองรับเยอะนะฮะหรือเราจะเรียนไว้แบบทำเองใช้เองก็ได้อะมันก็เป็นอีกตัวหนึ่งที่น่าสนใจเพราะว่ามันก็มีอัปเดตดีขึ้นเรื่อยๆนะครับกี่โมงอะเฮ้ยบ่าย 3แล้วเดี๋ยวอาจจะลงไลฟ์แล้วนะครับเพราะว่าเดี๋ยวว่าจะไปทำงานต่อนะครับยังไม่ได้ทำคลิปเลยเพราะเห็นเมื่อวานเห็นไอสารคดีเนี้ยก็เลยอยากจะพามาดูก่อนอยากจะมาไลฟ์พาดูนะฮะเนี่ยดูลง14 ชั่วโมงแป๊บเดียวนะครับคนดู 40,000 แล้วเพราะว่าไม่ใช่แค่คือแบบทั่วโลกนะฮะเขารอติดตามdocumentary ตัวนี้เพราะว่าเนี่ยมันมีเทรลเลอร์ออกมา2 เดือนที่แล้วนะครับแล้วก็ออกมาเป็นตัวเต็มให้ได้ดูกันตามนี้เลยนะครับโอเคนะฮะก็ประมาณนี้แล้วกันไลฟ์นี้นะฮะประมาณชั่วโมงพามาดูจริงๆนั่นแหละกะว่าพามาดูสารคดีจบก็จะไปนะครับโอเคเดี๋ยวไว้เจอกันใหม่นะครับไลฟ์หน้าเดี๋ยวขอตัวไปอัดคลิปทำงานต่อกันนะครับผมโอเคแล้วเจอกันทุกคนนะครับบ๊ายบาย